once I knew what the end goal was, my wife basically like sat me down and was like, what's the end goal? What do you want to do? And I said, I want to go to USC Film School. She was like, great, reverse engineer this and we'll get you there. Once I knew what that was, I got straight A's all the way through community college and then obviously in film school as well.
My grandfather walked the streets with a cardboard sign saying, "Mister, can I have a job?"
Now I want all you kids to understand you're living in the greatest country in the world.
I realize this is the American dream. America is opportunity.
This is the Song of America. Welcome to the Song of America, a show of inspiring stories of immigration to America. With today's political environment with immigration, I wanted to highlight stories that inspire people, stories of people that tell stories. And that's what we have here today in Armen Karaoghlian. See?
It's tough.
I had to ask my wife, she speaks and my kids speak, but
Yeah.
it's like,
It's a tough one.
He is the CEO of the Armenian Film Society and an Armenian American filmmaker, producer, and cultural advocate, best known for his co-founder and executive director of the Armenian Film Society in Glendale with his wife. How's that going?
It's going great. It's going great.
My wife and I worked together for 25 years.
Yeah.
The only thing I can tell you is that I made more money when she wasn't working there because I wrote everything off and she's a CPA, so she decided to be legitimate.
Yeah.
It's well past the IRS audit area, so I can say that. His journey to America reflects the experience of many immigrants, balancing identity, ambition, and cultural heritage while pursuing an opportunity. In 2015, Armen and his wife founded the Armenian Film Society to promote Armenian cinema and create opportunities for filmmakers across the Armenian diaspora. That's interesting. This is Chap GPT that wrote that.
It's nice.
I can't take credit for that wonderful prose, but I wanted you on the show because of that resume there, but also because at this point, this show is about storytelling, about telling the stories, about inspiring people to understand the impact of many immigrants in different societies, different roles on what's happening. And certainly in the Armenian world, cinema is a huge part of our culture in America, is it not?
Absolutely. I think film is one of the most accessible forms of art, right? So I think it is a tool where we can learn about other cultures, but it's also a form of entertainment. And I think it's incredibly underrated in that sense. But film is a large part of everybody's lives. Everybody's got an opinion about movies. Everybody's going to the movies. And I think that connective tissue aspect of it is what was most appealing for us when we were starting Armenian Film Society, and how we can use film as a tool to bridge communities and expose our stories and our art to a larger audience.
Well, you were from Armenia, Yerevan?
I was actually born in Jordan.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. So you
grew up in Yerevan?
I didn't. No, I actually visited Yerevan for the first time in 2023. Yeah. So I
can't
was
even say your highest Tansi then, can we?
well. So interesting is interestingly enough, my dad's side of the family, they're Armenian from Jordan, and my mom's side of the family's from Armenia. And my dad met my mom when he was studying at university in Armenia.
Oh, wow.
And after they met, they moved to Jordan, where they got married, had my sister, had myself, and we moved to Los Angeles right before I turned a year old. And so, I grew up speaking Western Armenian because that's what my dad spoke, even though all of my family in LA are, my mom's side of the family, Eastern Armenian speakers.
Really?
So I grew up speaking Western Armenian, and then somewhere along the way started speaking Eastern as well to sort of like get by in life. And I've always sort of had this feeling, I was born in Jordan, raised in America, but I'm Armenian. I feel closest to being Armenian, I suppose, but I'd never been to Armenia until 2023.
I was even there before that. I was born in Southern California. Yeah. In the beach cities.
I have a pretty good reason why it took me so long to go, but finally when I did go, it was a life-changing experience for me.
The reason I brought that up is not just because of the Armenian history, but I'm a Francophile, and when you learn the language, which I learned from my father, who was from Cairo, you have to study everything. You kind of just to get a understanding of the culture and the French have an amazing cinema culture. They're very good at it, from surrealism to documentaries to everything, and it's supplemented by the government. And we have I have a cousin here. She's married to our Armenian cousin, and she's a well-known editor, Carol Kravitz. She's done The Morning Show, things like that. And I was trying to ascertain the cinema history in Armenia. I mean, we have Ruben Mamulyan, we have some famous directors, Howard Kazandjian in America, but didn't know if you understood the history of cinema in Armenia. Is there any reflection on that?
Yeah, I mean, so, I think sort of the golden age of Armenian filmmaking was, in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And I think a large part of why we had our peak, if you will, or sort of that golden era of filmmaking was because, Armenia was part of the Soviet Union. We'd had access to funding and resources in a way that we don't do now. And, since Armenia's independence, I think we're trying to figure out what that landscape looks like and build that sort of like culture up. And it's been incredibly difficult because if you compare Armenia to other countries, we have a fraction of the budget or a fraction of the budget. And we don't have access to some of those resources that you need to sort of like build up that identity. But there has been a rich history there, films like We Are Our Mountains and many others are some of the best films, not just Armenian films, but some of my personal favorite films. And I think it's important to sort of understand, why that is and where we came from to understand why, some people talk about, well, we're not making films like we used to in Armenia. I think there's a clear reason why.
Well, I think anecdotally, I wasn't aware of all of it until I studied a little bit of your background, some others, and then we'll talk about Sev Ohanians and that whole thing. But down the road is a very famous auction house called John Moran, and there was a Ivanovsky painting that came up. And they usually don't authenticate the pedigree of these things. I mean, if you go to an auction, this is what it's purported to be, do your own research. And their only accolade to the painting, which we determined was probably a fake, was that it was owned by Ruben Mamulyan. So that's all these. It came from the estate of Ruben Mamulyan. Okay, if it's his, it's got to be real, but it probably wasn't.
Oh, interesting.
And so I decided to use that to find out who this guy was. And then not too long ago, maybe a few months ago, I was at a thrift shop, and there's a book on him. And so I bought the book. It's like $5 or something, and I started watching his movies.
Yeah,
and wow, they're pretty intense movies. The way his direction and the way he used film back then. They're talking about, I think, the 20s or the 30s. So that's why I asked the question about our history in that.
Yeah, I mean, he changed film.
Yeah,
in a lot of ways, and he's one of those diasporan filmmakers that didn't work in Armenia, but had major success outside of Armenia. He's a founding member of the DGA, and his use of camera movement. I mean, it still inspires filmmakers today. I remember 10 years ago now when La La Land came out and had all this amazing success and global attention. The filmmaker Damien Chazelle talked about how one of his big inspirations was a Ruben Mamulyan film.
Wow.
And an opening sequence in one of Mamulyan's films. And I think that is really important for us to know that Armenians have always been successful in the film industry, in different areas and in different positions. And it's not just recently, although it kind of does feel like recently we've had like this big boom as well of Armenians breaking through in the industry. But yeah, it goes all the way back to Ruben Mamulyan and even before him.
Well, it's interesting because when you watch films, and as I've gotten older and I've gotten into media, and I've always wanted. By the way, I was accepted to USC Cinema School in 1977.
Oh wow!
And I was told, look, you're already in business school. You probably shouldn't change at this point, because back then it was a little bit different. It was just starting, and it was I'm not just starting, but it was much younger, and there was no Spielberg Center or Lucas Center, whatever it is. But anyway, I was a frustrated creative person,
sure.
But I find so much inspiration to do what I'm just doing here from these kinds of things, and watching a Mamulyan film, watching La La Land, the storytelling that hopefully inspires somebody to do more than they're doing, whether it's cinema or anything else in their life. But that's what I glean from this. But what's interesting to me is that you can watch a film, and now that you're talking about it, you can watch a film, and if you pay attention enough and you've seen enough, you can sort of reflect on its origin, just like you can with a bottle of wine, which is my main trade. You can taste a bottle of Armenian wine and know, if you've tasted enough, if
Yeah.
you've seen enough films, that this
Yeah.
is probably French, or this is probably Armenian,
Right.
this is probably shot by an American director. Do you feel that way or not?
I mean, I had never thought about that wine analogy. That's
Yeah.
really great.
Oh, it's totally, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, at the end of the day, when I watch a film, I'm there to really be entertained by it and really just enjoy the story. But for me, I'm also a cinephile. My goal is to see every film ever made, and I won't be able to do that. So I'll see as much as I can. But yeah, certainly when I'm watching films, it's hard for me not to see some of those parallels or see some of those direct correlations. And then sometimes you're surprised. You see something and you sort of say, well, this reminds me of something. And then you hear the filmmaker talk about it, and,
That's kind of cool.
yeah. And so, I think, look, filmmakers all steal from other artists.
Yes.
This is not anything new. It's just, how do you repackage it and tell it in a way that feels unique to your own sensibilities? But yeah, you could certainly tell, especially every generation as they're coming up, they're inspired by the generation before them. And so, when Spielberg and Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola were coming up, all of what they were doing felt so original, but they were also, studying the masters and, stealing things here and there as well.
Going back to the wine analogy, and you were talking about the Armenian cinema, which was one of my first questions, which wine was stalled by the Soviets. The requirement for the vineyards was much less because they're making brandy. You distill that. And so the nuances of the ground and the terroir, as they call it, which is the weather and the soil and all the pieces, which is very unique to Armenia, and why you can taste an Armenian wine and go, wow, this could be Armenia. But that was all stalled during the Soviet Union. For 70 years or 75 years, nothing happened. The Soviets said, you're going to make brandy, and so that's your job. And so the recovery from that since 1991 has been extraordinarily fast. We were just in Paris, like I told you, and we went to the Armenian booth, and the wines were good. They were competing with everything in the whole world in this show. Was that the same then or is it the opposite? It sounds like it was the opposite.
Opposite, yeah. I think the best way to sort of think about it is quite simply that Armenia had a sort of piece of the pie when it came to funding and when it came to the resources that were allocated. And that piece of the pie was much larger than it is today. And so what's happening now is that in terms of governmental support, it's really just, again, a fraction of the budget that other countries have. However, I would argue that when you have those types of limitations or lack of resources, lack of funding opportunities, you get some of the most creative works that get created. And so there has been recently, I would say, more people going to Armenia to make their films, or, more interesting works kind of coming out. And so in some ways it's the opposite, but in other ways it's also, we're working with what we have access to.
Right.
And that then gives way to a lot of really creative and interesting projects as well.
It's interesting. I have 4 shows coming out of a trip to Armenia last time I was there.
Wow.
4 wine shows.
Wow.
And Civilnet gave me a crew.
Yeah.
They gave me 2
amazing.
Sony 4K cameras, 2 cameramen, a director, and a sound girl. And I have to tell you, I was really impressed. And we didn't have shot sheets or any beat sheets. I knew what I wanted to do, who I wanted to talk to, and they organized everything. The timing, where to meet, and they did all the B-roll stuff. And I have to tell you, I was really impressed with what came back.
And I hear that as well from a lot of folks who make films in Armenia. A lot of friends of mine have gone to Armenia, made, feature films, and they walked away with saying, this is some of the best crew I've ever worked with. These are some of the best people I've ever worked with. And so, I think we, especially as Armenians, we make up for it in other ways. But certainly we are still trying to build that identity, build that sort of film culture up, especially when you compare it to other countries. I think the goal is always for Armenia to become a destination for filmmaking, and for work to come out of Armenia that can compete with some of the major international films that are released every year. That's the end goal. The goal is to be nominated. The goal is for Armenia to have an identity, much in the same way that right now you talk about Romanian cinema, you talk about Greek cinema, people know what that looks like. They know some of the filmmakers, they know some of the major players. These are films that are competing at major film festivals, getting nominated for Oscars. We want Armenia to be a part of that conversation. And I think much of the work that we're doing also kind of speaks to how we get there.
When did that, you were born in Jordan, but you spent your life and grew up in America, Los Angeles, Glendale?
I spent most of my life in Glendale, yes.
Yeah.
Not all of my life, but yes.
Are you a Nitro?
I am.
Oh, wow. My wife's a Nitro.
I went to private Armenian school up until high school.
Which one?
I went to AGBU until the 4th grade.
High school here in Pasadena?
No, in Encino.
Encino.
Yeah. And then I went to Armenina, which is no longer around,
No.
Up until the 8th grade. But I lived in Glendale for most of my life. We would drive by Glendale High School when I was a kid, and I would tell my parents I want to go to that school. And I think honestly, a lot of my life just comes from movies and TV.
Yes,
right. I would see sort of what American high school looked like, and I would want that. I wanted to be a part of something a little bit larger than just what I was used to. And so I then decided to switch over and go to Glendale High School for high school.
Well, we sent our kids to Tufenkian and Champollion, and then we took them out for public school for that same reason, and to compete with other cultures.
Yeah.
Arcadia High is predominantly Asian, and that was it. But you just struck a chord for me, having watched and seen an American high school like that, and having gone through a cultural elementary and cultural junior high school. My mom is a Hollywood sheik, and she spoke Turkish, growing up. My father-in-law was a L.A. Roman, and I'm going to add to this conversation because there's part of the Song of America. There's a series I'm putting out, which is dying in the sense of the people that are not. There's not many people around that were first generation here, but grew up in an L.A. home, trying to keep their identity as Armenians, but assimilate immediately into American culture. And LA High couldn't be any more LA, right? Or Hollywood High for that matter.
Yeah.
And so I've been trying to cover that. And I want to add that to the subject of things to talk about is sort of the magnanimous viewpoint that they may have gotten from seeing a high school like Glendale High driving by, because you had been with a small elementary school up until that point.
My time in Armenian school, so it was K through 12, both of those schools. And I remember there was 300 students at Armenina when I was going there.
Through 12?
K through 12, 300 total students.
Wow, that's small.
It's small, right? And so when I went to Glendale High School, well, also, first of all, my parents, all my love and respect for those decisions. It was very difficult to send, 2 children to private Armenian school, pay tuition. And their goal was for us to be immersed in the Armenian culture, to grow up speaking it and reading it and writing it. And so I'm very grateful for that experience. But when I went to Glendale High School, my first day of high school was 9/11.
Oh, wow.
And it was 3,000 students.
Yes.
And it was a major culture shock in the wake of like this incredible tragedy that had happened in this country. I'd never been around Asian people. I'd never been around Black people, never been around anybody who was not Armenian.
Wow. And
also just the fact that it was 9/11 was a very confusing time. And so for me, it was, it was a very difficult time because I didn't really know how to navigate that world. I didn't really understand how credits worked. I didn't really, in Armenian school, we would just sit in a chair and the teachers would come to you every period.
Oh, really? That's what they did there?
Yeah. And in high school, I was like, where's the J building?
Yeah, right.
Trying to find a map, and there was, no cell phones, and everybody there knew each other from middle school and elementary school. And so all those like friendships had already been formed. I remember my sister.
Yeah, that's a tough part for sure.
Yeah. My sister once told me, hey, when you go to high school, just go to the cafeteria and ask somebody, hey, can I sit with you guys? I was like, this is not a Disney Channel movie,
that's tough.
This is not how it works. These people have been friends for years, and there's really no room for a newcomer to come in and inject himself. And it was a very difficult sort of way to navigate that. And my parents were also a little concerned as well, because it was outside of what they were used to. They didn't really know anything outside of the private Armenian school sort of experience. I was the first one in my entire family in LA that had gone to a public school. And so that was very tricky to navigate.
Were there my wife had the opposite experience, but she's a graduate of 19. I guess she's a graduate of 1980 or 79.
Yeah.
So her opposite experience, that it was the first time the school had really seen Armenians. But by the time you were there, there must have been plenty of Armenians.
All Armenians.
Yeah, there.
A
So
large
that
population
part
of
was
Armenians.
not new to them. But for you, coming from an elementary school and a junior high school that was all Armenian, which has a different feel. I mean,
It does. I mean, even though there was a large Armenian population, again, it was, I felt like I was been sheltered my whole life.
yeah.
And, in some cases, I had friends who hadn't had gone all the way in Armenian school. And then their first sort of real world experience was like college, which might actually have been more terrifying had I done that. I think so. I think, and not to say everybody who, I'm sure I'm not the only one that went through this experience. I'm sure others might have had a much more positive experience. Mine was very confusing.
Well, that's an awkward age anyway. I mean,
It is.
I think junior high is the worst season of a child's life because you're just wrestling with this, your whole identity and culture and all kinds of things. So was it at Glendale High that you felt like this career path that you're going to go right to SC, or you wanted to be in cinema film? I don't know what they have at Glendale High that would foster that, but
yeah, I remember when we were sort of registering for classes, they're talking to us about electives and all these different like departments that they have. And I've always been a movie lover. I'd grown up around, watching film with my family. And that's the only thing I ever really cared about. And I think in high school was the first time where I said, oh, do you have any like film classes I could take? And they were like, no, we have none of that, but we have cosmetology school and we have a construction academy. And I was like, and the closest thing that they had to it was drama school, which was interesting.
That's cool.
But it really felt more like there was more opportunities for people who wanted to act, on stage. So I actually signed up for construction academy because my dad was a general contractor. And I also signed up for drama. And I just remember, I couldn't really find what I was looking for. I wasn't really interested in, reading plays and performing them. That was really not my thing. And so, but it was the first time that I started kind of asking myself, well, how do I get to work in a career film? And is that even possible?
Yeah.
And those were, I think, the first times that I actually started asking those questions.
I would think, and I tell people that I took a break from my dream of being an actor or being in media for 35 years to sell wine. And then I came out and I'm 65 years old at the time. And I'm like a little late. I actually signed up for acting school in Berg. And I talked to John Ruskin over in Santa Monica, which is an incredible school. But he's like, well, if you come twice a week for 2 years, we'll get you ready. I'm like, well, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Not this commitment now, but that's why I fostered this piece of media. But you don't feel like being on stage and learning roles at least gave you a perspective. I wish I had taken drama in high school. I didn't, and I thought it was for
I guess it did. I remember in one of our classes we had to find a monologue, and I've never even told anybody this story. We had to find a monologue, and we had to memorize it. We had to get up on stage in front of our classmates and rehearse the whole thing. And you actually had to sort of, hand the piece to your, to the teacher and all of that. And so I remember one day, I was kind of caught off guard. I guess they had like switched names around and it was my day to go up on stage. And like everything I do, I had procrastinated and I hadn't really found a monologue. So they said, all right, here are the, 4 people that are going to go up on stage today. And mine was like the last name. And so I was like, I have an hour to prepare something.
Wow.
And so what I did was I took out a sheet of paper and I wrote a monologue. And I completely just made it up on the spot. And I memorized it. And I handed it off to my teacher and I said, hey, I don't have like the original copy, it's by, and I made up an author's name. I said, it's by this author. I don't have the copy with me. So I just, I just wrote it down just so you have something to look at. And I did the monologue. And my teacher was like, who wrote that? That's incredible. and I gave like the author name and, he had never heard of her. I remember it was a female. So he wrote like the name down And I was like, oh my God, I'm either going to get like caught and get in a lot of trouble. And maybe at that time it wasn't as easy to find, like you can like Google the author name, but it gave me a lot of confidence because this thing that I wrote, and, you know, they spent then the next like 30 minutes talking about the themes of the piece, you know, talking about
That's amazing.
the character arc. And I remember at the time just having a lot of confidence, like, oh, maybe I'm not just interested in this world. Maybe I actually might have the skill set to be able to apply it.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
And then to wing it and then to do it. And then it's much better than my poem I had to read, Azadan Azvaz, you know, when I was studying Armenian.
Yeah.
I'm sure the accent wasn't very good. So you applied directly to SC Cinema School at that point?
No, I have a very interesting backstory on my educational experience. I'll give you really quickly. I was a straight A student all throughout like elementary up until middle school. And in middle school at Arshak Dikanian, I was getting bullied a lot because my sister and I were the only like Western Armenian speakers there. And so a lot of the students there, they, you know, made fun of me and they really bullied me. And I ended up kind of failing my way through like middle school because I was just sort of like really,
Wow.
really
I've
bad
never heard
experience.
anybody say that before.
Yeah. And so suddenly I was failing all my classes. And I remember like there was you know, my parents came in, spoke with the principal, and the principal's like, you know, Armen is a terrible student and, you know, he's unmotivated and he's stupid.
That sounds like the Armenian school.
Yeah. And this was a big thing. And in fact, like, I've only recently kind of started talking about this because kind of growing up, this was also kind of just like a little bit of like a taboo subject. But my parents were like, no, Armen is like really bright, you know, he's been very successful, you know, and they just weren't really having it. That's one of the reasons why I also left to go to Glendale High School, in addition to the fact that I really wanted to go there. At Glendale High School, though, because it was a very unfamiliar sort of like world to me, I started, you know, starting to fail classes again. And, you know, what happened was in like the 10th or 11th grade, my counselor called me in and said, you don't have enough credits. I didn't know what credits were. I didn't know, how do I get more credits? And he said, we're actually going to have to like kick you out of the school.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
And you're going to have to go to a secondary school to make up for.
Wow. That is getting down there.
The secondary school was a school where people were getting into fights. There was a lot of drugs.
Yeah.
And so I went there. I got punched in the face by somebody there, and that person ended up stabbing somebody and getting sent to like juvie or, you know, whatever it's called. It was a very scary place to be. However, it was the only place that I ever felt that the teachers there really cared about the students.
Wow.
It had this like really bad reputation of like, oh, if you go there, you're a failure.
Yeah, right.
And it was incredibly.
It
was also incredibly. I knew my parents were very disappointed in me, the fact that I had ended up there. And they were disappointed because they knew that I was better than that. I was smarter than that. I was one of the only few people that made up my credits and transferred back to Glendale High School.
Crazy.
And then in Glendale High School, I went there. It was the last semester of senior year. And I was so terrified of passing because literally right after that class wrapped, we had to go rehearse for graduation. And I was so terrified I went through this entire like trajectory of like bettering myself. Am I, you know, I don't want to fail this class. I don't want to fail this exam. So I wrote a cheat sheet, you know, just to have in case I needed it.
What class was that?
This was an English class, Armenian teacher who
Really?
taught it. Yeah, young Armenian teacher. I sat down for the final exam. I looked at that exam and I said, I don't need this cheat sheet. I know the material. I'm going to pass this. So I took the cheat sheet out and I put it in my pocket. And as soon as I did that, the teacher walked behind me, saw the cheat sheet, pulled me aside and said, you're failing this class. I sat outside, literally crying until everybody left. I went up to her and I told her everything. I told her, I went through all these different obstacles and challenges in my life. I went to the secondary school. I made up my credits back. The only reason why I had this cheat sheet is because I didn't want to fail and I was afraid of failing, but I didn't need it and I didn't use it. And I'm giving you my word. And she looked at me and she said, I hope you learn from your mistake. You can make up for it in summer school. And so I couldn't go to graduation rehearsal. I couldn't graduate on stage. I did make up my that class in summer school and I got sent my diploma. And I realized I wanted to do better. I went to Pasadena College because obviously I don't think I was really in the position to apply for I didn't really know what I wanted to do at that point. I was sort of this I was in this place where I was just being told like, yeah, you go to community college, you take general education classes, and then you transfer. And it's like, well, where do I go? What classes do I take? Why am I taking those classes? It all felt very arbitrary to me. Mm-hmm. And so as you can imagine, what happened at Pasadena College, I started failing again because I was unmotivated. I didn't really know what the end goal was.
You showed up.
And I was taking, algebra classes at like 10 o'clock at night. And I was like, why am I taking this class? Like, and my whole kind of experience is every time I would go talk to counselors, whether in high school or college, I just felt like they didn't care. They didn't really, they didn't really give me the
inspiration.
Yeah. And so, then I got a notice from Pasadena College that you're on academic probation, and then they asked me to leave. And that's around the time when I met my yeah.
How do you maintain any inspirational goal when you're being told this all your life practically?
Yeah. I just, for me, so I met my wife, who was obviously my girlfriend at the time, at this time, and she asked me, well, what do you want to do with your life? And I told her I actually didn't have an answer to that question. I knew that I loved film. I knew I wanted to work in film in some capacity, but I was also lying to myself, like, well, maybe I can be an English major, or maybe I can go to like law school, things I'd never really cared
or inspired
much
you
about.
before.
Yeah. And so she basically told me, come to LA City College, which is where she was going. And my mom told me, you're not going to go to school with your girlfriend. You're going to slack off. And it was the exact opposite. She'd always done so well in school. She took school so seriously and was incredibly motivated. And she helped coach me basically. When counselors failed me, she stepped up and she was the one to say, all right, you want to go to USC Film School. These are the 13 classes you need to take to be able to transfer there. And so I applied while I was in LA City College, a year after her kind of mentoring me a little bit, and I got into USC Film School.
That's an incredible story. The thing that's incredible about it is the trials and tribulations that you encountered remind me, and I was telling you, I read Max Nikias's book, of somebody that had come from a foreign country who had not experienced any of our culture and met all those similar headwinds, not understanding anything. And here you are, pretty much born here as far as your experience. And it took, and I'm a little league coach still as a grandfather.
Nice.
I really consider my job to coach, of course, but to inspire these children to do something. And no one was willing to do that with you.
No, I remember even in LA City College, I went to that counselor and I said, I think I want to apply to USC Film School. And she said, well, your grades are not good enough. Pick something more realistic, like graphic design.
I had the same conversation with my counselor.
Yeah. She told me to apply for graphic design. I was like, that's not even the same thing. Like I don't want to be a designer. Like that's not what I want to do. And I think the through line has been that I've obviously had incredible teachers and people that I've met and encountered over my life, but the 1, 2, or 3 of those people who were incredibly negative and really didn't help me.
Terrible.
They did a lot of damage. They did a lot of damage to like a 13, 14-year-old kid, breaking his confidence. And really, if it wasn't for somebody like my wife, my parents just didn't know any better, right? Like my parents didn't really know how do you apply to like a UC school or a USC type of school. They wanted the best for me. They did everything they could to set me up for success. But when I was facing these difficulties and I was trying to figure out, well, how do I get from A to B? They didn't really know how to connect those dots. And we didn't have anybody in our family that could help connect those dots either.
That's a huge disadvantage.
Yeah. And so for me, it was, I remember there was this period of time where it was like, well, you're clearly not going to get into any one of these like schools. So what is it that you want to do with your life? That was kind of like the message that I was getting from everybody that I was encountering. And for me, it was,
Wow.
it was once I knew what the end goal was, you know, my wife basically like sat me down and was like, what's the end goal? What do you want to do? And I said, I want to go to USC Film School. She was like, great, reverse engineer this and we'll get you there. Once I knew what that was, I got straight A's all the way through community college and then obviously in film school as well. And it kind of proved that earlier point where my parents were talking to like my principal when I was in the 8th grade, like, no, he's a smart kid. He might just be a little unmotivated, you know, and they didn't really know about like all the bullying and stuff at the time either. And so,
there's probably hundreds of kids.
Yeah.
In each class of every school.
I think it's this thing of, you know, it's not a one size fits all solution. You know, it's not just, you know, if somebody's having difficulty, like let's say in school, you know, there could be a million reasons why, you know, it was this like really black and white way of thinking, which is, well, clearly, you know, he's failing because he's not bright enough. And, you know, they were talking about like holding me back and things like that. It's just, you know, I don't think they listen enough. People in
That's
those,
probably the number one human ailment in the sense of not listening. I mean,
nobody sat me down and asked me what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think like as an adult now, I can look back on that and realize that maybe if I had somebody to talk to, isn't that what a counselor is supposed to do? Like, you know, like, are you
mine laughed at me.
Yeah.
My mom says, you're going to the Air Force Academy. The guy goes, no, you're not. And he laughed.
Yeah.
That wasn't very good. So you get to SC Cinema School. It was probably getting toward digital then.
Yeah, we were actually,
videotape?
we were the last class to shoot on film.
Oh, you did shoot on film.
But, so it was this like really amazing time where we shot on film and then we also shot on digital. So we had the best of both worlds. So it was kind of the perfect time to be in film school.
I used to scrape emulsion off my Super 8, you know, and try to edit that way.
Yeah.
I had a camera that you could rewind and superimpose on it. It was really cool.
Yeah.
Still have that camera somewhere.
Oh yeah. It was incredible. It was incredible. Like some of my early projects, we shot it on film and it was great to understand how to use film cameras. And I've always just like, you know, I remember when like it was film versus digital, like 15, 20 years ago, it was like, oh, we have to keep film alive. But it was great to be able to have a little bit of a hand in that and then learn digital filmmaking.
So what you do, you take editing, you take composition, you take all the things that now digital, you probably take color and white balance, all the things that go along with shooting digital that are different than film. Did something jump out at you as like, I think I want to do this part of it, director, producer, editor?
I applied to USC Film School, and as soon as I got there, I'd always wanted to write and direct my own material. But as soon as I got there, I realized, well, I'm going to be here for 3-4 years. Even though I have a pretty good feeling of what I want to do, I want to keep my options open. I'm in school. I should experiment. I should try things. I should take classes that might not be immediately sort of jumping out at me. So I took all of those classes. I took acting classes. I took editing classes, cinematography. And it was incredible because I got to walk away from some of those experiences going, well, I never want to do that again. You know, I had some of my professors sit me down and say, you know, you should pursue cinematography. And they were very serious about it. And they said, you know, because I was undergrad, you know, they encouraged me to apply for, you know, grad school specialized in cinematography. I had some teachers say that about editing as well. It was my time to experiment and try things. At the end of the day, I still felt more passionately about writing and directing. But what happened in film school was I started writing about film for the school newspaper. I started writing for an Armenian magazine called Yerevan magazine. And I started a film column with them. And I started doing a whole lot of other things. I started a film and architecture publication with a friend of mine. He was in architecture school while I was in film school. He was an architect who wanted to be a filmmaker. I was a filmmaker who wanted to be an architect. We started this online publication about film and architecture. And that was very exciting.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was very exciting.
I mean, architecture is art, film is art.
Yeah, well, what was really interesting was we would take a film and would take a specific scene from that film, and he would draw up an architectural floor plan of that scene. And I would write an essay and talk about the use of space, the use of production design. And this was a time, this was in 2011, 2012. This was a time when nobody was really writing about film in that way. Now Architectural Digest has a whole like film and architecture column on their website, and you see more of these like interviews and conversations with production designers. But that was really fun because, you know, everybody I knew wanted to make films, and I still wanted to make films, but I was having a really great time, you know, running this film and architecture publication. I was writing for, you know, a couple of different outlets. And in fact, in my last year of film school, I started TAing at Woodbury University, which is where my wife was going to school. And I started TAing a film professor there who was teaching a class. And I basically was kind of helping him with material. And somewhere along the way, he asked me if I wanted to like guest lecture on the material. And then he asked me if I wanted to take over the class. And I was still, like, I hadn't graduated. I hadn't graduated from school yet. I had no credentials, but I had this like immense passion for the material.
Clearly.
And then that actually then resulted in like a 5-year teaching job at the university where I taught film. And so for me, it was like I had a clear plan at USC, but I wanted to try my hand at everything. And I kind of certainly did try my hand at everything.
Do you think, we have to get into the AFS here soon before we run out of time, but your passion is obvious. And that's what it takes in any industry to be successful, at least to catch somebody's attention. When you start teaching this class at Woodbury, depending on what the curriculum meant, but do you think that your outlook on film obviously was developed at SC Film School, or it maybe have just been solidified at SC Film School, and what you taught at Woodbury was your point of view of what you think it should be, or just sort of the esoteric stuff, this is what film is?
That's a great question. I attribute everything to USC Film School. I really walked away from there with the best possible experience and education as possible. The thing that happened at Woodbury was I felt like, I was right out of school, so I was pretty young. I had students older than me actually in that class. I felt like I was offering whatever little experience I had. I was kind of providing as much value as I can to the students. But the thing that happened was I had I taught a couple of different classes there. One of the classes was I would show a film, and then I would bring in a filmmaker who worked on that film to talk to my students. And it was a very intimate setting, 40, 50, 60 students. And so what happened was I realized that my students were getting incredible access to these filmmakers, and we were having these like really amazing discussions. And what happened was that I really realized, I think these were like the early seeds of AFS kind of being formed, was that I loved being able to curate film screenings, bring in filmmakers for discussions, and hopefully connect the audience, my students at the time and later my audience, bring them in closer proximity with these filmmakers. And I think that was kind of the earliest kind of seeds of inspiration for AFS. Just kind of, I guess that you could sort of say for that first couple of years teaching there, I was putting in the groundwork, laying down the foundation of what would become AFS with my wife.
With no expectation or no understanding that possibly was happening. It just was.
Yeah.
I've been on set I've shot commercials. I had David Zucker, the famed comedian, comedy writer, direct 3 commercials for me.
Nice.
As we're friends. I was an extra in some movies back in the 70s when I was at SC.
Great.
So I've been on set.
Yeah.
And when I shot these commercials, and the cinematographer was a master's at USC that did that. Maybe it would have been you one day.
Yeah.
And he shot the whole thing. He goes, and at the end he said, this is when the magic happens. And so I would think that a director, producer's role is to involve the watcher so much that all of the technical aspects that go into it, for instance, the set design, the architectural set design, the space design, where you're going to walk to, where you're going to stop, what you're going to say, is to take the person away from the technical part, not even notice those things are happening. And the reason I say that is it's so complicated. From writing, scripting, to the play, to the what they call the teleplay, to the production. You're shooting out a sequence, but the actor has to feel like they're in the same place they were 2 seconds ago, and then put it together at the end. And I always just found that fascinating, and it's such a departure from what I think the viewer has to see, right? They just see this story and they get inspired and they emote.
And they don't know that it took maybe 10, 20 days to shoot that sequence. Yeah.
Here we are. The AFS now, you're going to have a Oscar watching party, which I have to politely, I had signed up for it, but it turns out I'm going to be at the pharmacy school banquet for some reason. Yeah. Well, there's a reason. My father was a pharmacist.
Sure.
At SC. But there's going to be some stuff there. I mean, we have an Armenian producer who has been nominated. He's got more nominations for a film than any other film in history. Is that huge, or is it just good?
No, it's incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I met Sev Ohanian, the producer of Sinners, my first day of film school.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And
that's right. He never graduated, I don't think, right? He didn't finish.
He did. No, he did.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, we walked on stage together. We walked on stage together, and he turned to me and said, "What are you doing this summer?" And I told him what I was up to. And I said, what are your plans? And he said, "I'm producing a film in the Bay Area. God, I just hope people get to see this movie." That film was Fruitvale Station with Ryan Coogler, which started his collaboration with him, which is now been the most nominated film of all time. It's a little, I'm so incredibly proud of him. I'm so incredibly excited and happy for him, but it is a little surreal, to be able to kind of connect those dots. Cause that wasn't that long ago,
Right.
He's had incredible success, but he's also, the smartest and most talented person that I've met in this industry. And that was evident on day one, by the way. Just the way he would take notes in class, you could tell his mind worked in a different way. But I will say this about what you just brought up. We've always felt that Armenians were going to break through in this industry in a real significant way. When I was writing for Yerevan magazine about 15 years ago, I actually had this column where I talked about the Armenian New Wave. And I made this argument that I said, Armenia's New Wave is, not necessarily in the country of Armenia. It's the diaspora and filmmakers that I'm seeing now that are working in this industry. They're going to have a big moment in the next 10 plus years. So, we were right about a lot of that.
Yeah,
and obviously now,
amazing.
Now it's all kind of, coming to real life. But look, what Sinners has accomplished, just at the box office and, for original storytelling, and now it's how it's translated to the awards. It's incredible. It is a big deal. It's an incredible achievement. And we've been a big supporter and believer in this film. It's everything we believe in for film.
There's no industry that hands anything to you, and certainly not Hollywood.
Yeah.
You have to earn every piece of it. I mean, so that's what the accomplishment really shows you, what could happen. And you sensed it. You sensed that the creative mind, and the Armenian mind is extraordinarily creative. Like there's a guy here who works down the street. He's an iron worker. He does all my iron work. And he produces the esoteric gates for schools.
Yeah.
But when you give him a project that deals with ornate and a feeling, French, Armenian, whatever you're trying to do, he's the most credible artist. I just love watching him work. And I give him jobs to see what he's going to produce.
Yeah. I mean, Armenians are just some of the most hardworking and creative people. And so I'm not surprised in that sense that the Armenians that are working in this industry are doing some amazing
he's talking about
things.
Sev being the smartest guy I've ever met, and how he reacted to information given to him at class, how he reacted with people.
Mm-hmm.
The most brilliant winemaker, and I've interviewed 500.
Wow.
That I ever interviewed was Vahe Kashkarian, who makes wine in Armenia now.
Oh.
And he came to this building and we both recognized each other from a previous deal because he was in the restaurant business for a long time. And I had 4 people waiting in the lobby to talk about buying this piece of real estate that I was sitting in. And I was so intrigued by Vahe's conversation. I took him in my office and we finished it. These guys got upset and they left. So I could have blown a big real estate deal.
That's so funny.
Because I wanted to listen to Vahe's comments.
Yeah.
And really, and I had dinner with him in Paris. Really the most brilliant viewpoint of what wine is and how wine is made. So the AFS itself then is I don't know, call it philanthropic, but it's a cultural group. It focuses on what promotion, help with production, all those things. What is its main function, mission statement, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, we're a creative and cultural hub. Our goal is to bring communities together through film. And a lot of what we do is through our year-round programming. And so we obviously host a lot of premieres and screenings and conversations with filmmakers and a festival now. The goal is to be able to bring audiences closer, like I was talking about with my class, is we want to make it, bring Hollywood closer to us, and be able to connect some of those dots. But in the last, several years, we've expanded our mission. Our goal is now really a lot more layered. We're always fighting for representation. Armenians have always been portrayed in a negative light in Hollywood, and we've tried to be on the front end of that as much as possible. We've done a lot of work that's not really like public facing. We don't really talk about it, but there's quite a bit that we do, behind the scenes to make sure that, we have more positive and more authentic portrayals of who Armenians are. Another part of what we're working on is to bring more filmmaking to Armenia, and that's kind of part of a larger goal. But we want more filmmakers, both Armenian and non-Armenian, to go to Armenia and turn Armenia into a new capital for filmmaking, and that is going to take quite a bit of work. And it's not just us who are kind of leading the charge. It's working collectively with a lot of other bodies. And so, yeah, I'd say our mission is really multifaceted. There's quite a bit that we're doing. We have a new scholarships and grants program that we just announced. We're also getting into film production ourselves and starting to hopefully tell stories that we feel deserve to be told. So there's quite a bit. We're always building upon some of our original ideas and that kind of vision that we had early on. We really believe in kind of building the foundation and then being able to build on top of that. That's worked for us in the past.
Let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
The storytelling part is like, there's a post this morning about the young woman, I forgot her name, starts with an A, but I couldn't pronounce it. I was talking to my wife, genocide survivor, all that stuff. And by the way, you're sitting where Edgar sat when I interviewed Edgar, and Yvette, and the songwriter and the producer Annie for Winter Song.
Yeah.
I haven't released the podcast yet, but I mean that has to be a big thing. That granted, it's a Hallmark, romantic comedy kind of thing, but they shot all in Armenia.
Yeah.
And so here's the question. I'm going to try to say this politically and articulate it politically nicely. It's been said by many people that are in the trade, whether it's TV or movies, that the genocide story's dead. No one, at least the way we're telling the story. Do we have to tell it again? Do we have to have a duduk in the background that just suggests that this Armenian community is this downtrodden, martyred society? And is there room for that anymore? And how do we tell better stories than that? How do we tell the story better than that?
I mean, this is a great question.
And maybe it's not answerable, but
no, I have an answer for it. I think we are many stories, as the Armenian people. We have a lot of stories to tell. The genocide is one part of our story. And I think those films are important, and I have nothing against them. What I've always wanted to see, and I think when we started AFS, our goal was to have a future in which there would be a lot more diverse stories being told. Winter Song is made by dear friends of ours. Mm-hmm. And we had this incredible vantage point where we saw how hard they worked. But what's amazing about that is that, they told a story that really had nothing to do with genocide.
That's right.
And
that's what kind of what I brought up.
Yeah, and what I want is, I want Armenians to have, romantic comedies, horror films, musicals. I want to see it all. I want to see a science fiction film. I want us to tell, if you made a film, it would be very different than the film that I make, and it would be very different from the next Armenian. And so that's what I would like to see more of, because while, genocide films and that subject matter, I do think is incredibly important. Film is also, kind of go back to my first point earlier in this conversation, is film is how we can better understand other cultures. Film is also a form of entertainment. So, through a film that's like a romantic comedy or something lighthearted, you get a whole lot of audience members to watch that and learn a little bit more about this country in a way they wouldn't if it was strictly about war and genocide. Mm-hmm. And so my goal is to be able to share our story and our culture with as many people as possible. And I think the way you do that is just by telling really great stories.
So how about the guys like Howard Kazandjian, who, I don't know if he's produced anything that deals with it. Craig Darien, I saw a Q&A session with him. I mean, this is one of these guys that clearly was in the background of Hollywood, but hugely important.
Yeah.
And Howard producing Star Wars and, I don't know, a couple other major things. Those guys, and Zalian, right?
Zalian, yeah.
You interviewed him.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. And you asked him the question, are you ever going to bring a film to light? And he said, I was thinking about it, and I met him somewhere. I think it was the SC Scripter Award or something.
Yeah.
And the answer seemed plausible, but are those guys interested in telling those stories at all?
Yeah, here's my kind of take on that is, not everyone needs to tell Armenian stories. Right. They are doing a whole lot just by being the incredible filmmakers that they are.
Right. That's what I thought.
Like, my feeling is Howard Kazandjian, he's never really made anything overtly Armenian, but he's been involved in these massive blockbuster franchises. That's great. We should have Armenians that are operating in that capacity. We should have Armenians that are executives at studios. They don't all necessarily need to weave in their Armenian background and culture. Right. Hopefully they're proud of who they are, and hopefully they're on record talking about their culture, because we also need that, especially with what we've seen with the recent wars and genocides that Armenians have been through. We need people to know, there's Armenian people, and here's who they are. So my feeling is that they, I don't fault anybody for not necessarily doing that. And I think the first and foremost, we should strive to be as successful as possible we can in this industry. I think what Sev has done is really amazing. Sev has spent his career working at the highest level possible. Yeah. And he's obviously made quite a big name for himself. And hopefully people are saying, Ohanian, what is that? Is that an Armenian last name? That's a lot. And there will then inevitably be other filmmakers that come in that want to tell very specific stories about their culture. So I think as long as we have diversity, that's the goal. That's my goal, at least.
I think there's huge value in that. I'm sure as a kid, like both my wife and I discovered later in our marriage that I would look at the obituaries, even though I grew up in Palos Verdes at the beach, would look for Armenian names for whatever reason. And certainly when you scroll through credits in the show, you look for the Armenian names. And there's tons.
I kind of joke. I always say that, I thought I was the only one scanning for Armenian last names in credits, in film credits. And then I realized that all Armenians did that. That's true. I remember just as a kid watching a movie and I'd see an Armenian last name, and it meant the world to me, let alone seeing an Armenian on screen or anything like that. I mean, that stuff is important. It's important for the 13-year-old version of myself, who's trying to figure out, can I do this? Do I want to do this? I don't know of anybody else that works in this industry. There's a lot that goes in terms of, having that reassurance of you can do something like this. It is possible.
Whether the grip or the gaffer or the producer or the director or the makeup artist,
but that's
you see it.
That's also important too, because it's not just you have to be a director, you have to be an actor.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of people who, they're craftspeople. They want to work, maybe they're makeup artists, but they'd like to do makeup for film.
Yeah.
And it is a path. It is something that you can do. Whereas I think when I was growing up, it was very much like, oh, all of film is like, that's not possible. Maybe you have one or two people, but it's.
Well, I'll give you
it's
an
too tough to
early
break in.
anecdotal Armenian participation in media. My grandfather came here, I forgot, 18 or 1920. So he was Jack Danielian. He was part of that generation where you came to assimilate. You already respected the idea. You got to come to America in the first place, and you did what you could to assimilate. So my mom spoke Turkish. They spoke Turkish in the house because they came from Aintab. But he became president of Hollywood Rotary Club. I mean, 1955. This is like the most American organization in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy with this heavy Turkish accent was the president because he was a very gregarious, happy-go-lucky guy. But he was on You Bet Your Life with Groucho Marx in 1947.
Wow. That's something I didn't even know about.
And we have the sound, we have the audio. I'm looking to see if they even filmed it back then. It might have been just the radio show. And he had just bought at auction for $850 in 1946 the name Zant Carpet, which was the preeminent name before the war for carpeting throughout the country. And they went bust during the World War II, and then he went to the auction and paid $850. He tells Groucho this story.
Wow.
And it became the largest carpet store west of the Mississippi for many, many, many years. It wasn't until recently my friend who's in the business stopped replacing stuff that had put in by my grandfather's company.
Wow.
And he cleared many Armenian immigrants to America because he had to have a sponsor that worked at Zant in Hollywood to get their citizenship.
Wow.
So
That's
it's
incredible.
a great, fun story. And he was written up in one of the magazines. I'm going to read his story from Coronet magazine, which was precursor to this Reader's Digest, as one of these episodes for the Song of America, because it's a great story.
That's amazing.
Well, this has been fascinating. We have much to talk about after we turn the mics off, but it's been over an hour. One camera already turned off because it got too hot. So one of my technical difficulties I got to work with.
That's all right.
But really interesting stuff, and there's much more to talk about. And I hope we can do it again, maybe after the Olympic, maybe after a few more months when different things happen with the AFS.
Sure.
As you're doing it, and maybe bring the wife in too, and
I would love that.
do a conversation because it's really been interesting, much more than I expected.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me share the story. It's been my honor.
Cheers. That's why I end wine shows. Cheers with that.
Makes sense.
Thanks.
Makes sense.